Two things I'd like to say. I know that many of our intentions this week have been for the mothers of victims of tragedy, but I'd also like to think of it as the parents of victims of tragedy, to include the fathers as well as the mothers in our prayers, that's for sure. The second thing is there is a presentation downstairs today. It's changed. The first presentation was pretty much pictures of some of the intentions for which we have been praying. The new one is on the Stations of the Cross. It's a bit redundant simply because we have such beautiful Stations of the Cross here in this church. We really do. We have absolutely beautiful. And the pictures that I took for them were from our major seminary, what was our major seminary in Northampton, Pennsylvania. So I just invite you to do that. I'd like to begin with yet another poem. Very simple title, yet it's called Mary of Sorrows. And it's a bit about the transition from pictures to reality. We do not in our country niche you at corners, crossroads, highway shrines. But in Karen's face, as she talks of her son, whose pain will not redeem the world, as Margarita, whose eldest will not survive her, in Sylvie, whose child learned all his letters in his second year, and by age 4 had been condemned to mute incomprehension, you appear. Son-bearer, mother of mothers, we know we cannot be spared. Help us bear our sorrows and the sorrows of our children. Help us bear. Whenever I would visit my uncle in the hospital, now my uncle went to the hospital a lot. I think I visited him in about 5 different Philadelphia hospitals. Einstein, Temple, University of Pennsylvania, one of the hospitals up in northeast part of Philadelphia. He had back problems. He worked, which was great for us, he worked at Tasty Cake. So, and we always got the extra stuff that he brought home. He's got the freebies. I don't know if they were free, but he had to work. But what was interesting is whenever I would go to visit my Uncle Dick in the hospital, the first thing he would do, he would say, call your Aunt Margaret, his wife. He would give you the phone to call her. He never wanted you to kind of, and he sensed her not being able to be with him maybe at that particular time in the hospital room. So as soon as anybody walked in to see my uncle, he would hand them the phone and say, call your Aunt Margaret and tell her you're here and that everything's okay. So, and as we do the Stations of the Cross, very much like the Rosary, first station, we are in the front, near the front of the church, near the altar. We go around the Stations of the Cross, we come back up. Where do we end up? At the altar. Remember the other day we talked about when we prayed the Rosary, we said you start with the crucifix, you say the 5 mysteries, and you end up with the crucifix. Again, it's the same thing. So good way to think about it. Of course, when I was in 8th grade, we would have to go to the Stations of the Cross after school. And the only problem with that was if the papers came in to be delivered, the boss didn't care where you went to school or what you were praying about. He wanted you to be there to get your papers off the truck. So, for me, it was like the 14 stations were like the 400 Stations of the Cross on Friday afternoon until I could get to the branch and get my papers and deliver them. All right? But what I learned was that they're really an important part of our life. Thomas Merton, monk, mystic of the 20th century, poet, writer in his own right, convert to Catholicism. Convert, actually, to a lot of things, good and bad. But one of the things that he did, on December the 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, in 1941, he got his letter from Gethsemane. He was teaching college English at St. Bonaventure University in Olean, New York. So he get the letter, and the monk said, if you're coming, come. If you really believe you have a vocation to the Trappist, no time like the present. So he gathers up his materials, says goodbye to the Franciscans, who gave him hospitality there as a faculty member. He was a layperson. And he gets on the train. So he gets the cab at Olean and he goes to the train station and he says, okay, thank you. But he doesn't go to the train station right away. He goes into this church and he makes the Stations of the Cross. And it's really just the fact that in the 7th-story mountain, he goes out of his way to talk about that. I mean, he could have just said, I packed up my belongings, I went to the train station, and I got on the train and went to Kentucky. But he stopped and he made the Stations of the Cross. Now, probably I say that was his Franciscan, brief but shining Franciscan moment. He had wanted to enter the friars, but was turned down. He said, I might as well be honest with you and tell you everything I did before I decided that I wanted to be a priest and a Franciscan. And when they listened, the Franciscans said, no thanks. All right? So that was the end of that. But they gave him a job. They gave him a job as a teacher. So finally, he gets accepted by the Trappists. But before he does that, he says, I stopped in a church and I made the Stations of the Cross. Then the next thing that he says, a couple of years later in his journals, which are literary works in themselves, he says, it's Good Friday. There is absolutely no reason to make long speeches to God on Good Friday. In other words, let the cross speak for itself. Unfortunately, I feel that there should be longer speeches to God on Good Friday, but it's not Good Friday. So when we do the Stations of the Cross, I believe very much, like my uncle, Jesus would say, talk to Mary. She understands all this stuff that I'm going through, okay? And the personalities involved. And it's a very interesting thing, the personalities that are involved. So I'm going to go down a little bit and try to point some of that out. Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay. I can either open my big mouth or I can stay in the pulpit. The personalities involved, of course, is you have the women of Jerusalem who are, and there's a whole world of things about the women, the weeping women of Jerusalem. All right, but we take Joseph of Arimathea, patron saint of undertakers, Simon Cyrene, right, the Marys who came, and sometimes, as I said, in some Gospels, Mary is at the foot of the cross. At other times, there's an emphasis on something else. Certainly Mary in the 4th station. But all these people, they point out a certain degree of devotion and things that people need. And I would say every one of us, almost all those people outside of Mary, the Mother of God, they're reluctant disciples. Thank you very much. They're reluctant, all right? So, you get down here, Pontius Pilate, well, there's a reluctant disciple, right? Okay? Then, you have the falls and how often the 3 falls, and I think it's 3, maybe 7 and 9, where Jesus falls, okay? Veronica, a reminder, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Veronica's down there in that corner, okay? And of course, what is it? Veronica, the absolute true image of Christ. So the Christian in the world is to be exactly that, the true image of Christ. And so Veronica probably gets a pass on reluctance, all right? Simon in number 5, okay? The women of Jerusalem come up probably in 8. Yeah, there he is back in the corner against the wall, okay? Next to the glass. The meaning of the women of Jerusalem is that he really fulfills a prophecy. And they may feel bad about Jesus, but he says, if you think this is bad, wait till a couple more generations. And I guess it's like a couple more generations of godlessness. And then you're really going to have some problems. All right? So in many, many ways, Jesus, even during this death sentence, death row that he's going through, he's constantly teaching us. And he's also saying, I need more disciples. I want to. But he's probably also constantly pointing to Mary and saying, there's the perfect disciple. Okay, so he leads us up here, and of course there's the stripping, and some of these I don't want to go into too much detail because I got a couple more days where we will go into detail on the stations. All right, but I want to make you aware of the beautiful work of art that these are. And I've heard more and more people, and I'm the same way. They say, when I walk into a church, I don't even think about going over to look at the stage. Is there anyone here from Our Lady Help of Christians Parish? The stations there are imported from Germany, I believe. The pastor told me, he said probably at one time it was a German speaking and a German parish, or it was identified that way, and then it became, as I say, the Irish parish, which means everybody, so to speak. But the bottom line is this, that the stations in the church, in Our Lady Help of Christians, were probably, maybe at the turn of the last century, imported from Germany. So they're really a beautiful, beautiful work of art, that's for sure. But we should also say, as it does in the poem, that it's not just a picture. It's a devotion that draws us into putting ourselves there and learning from the pictures that we see. Did anyone, grammar school, picture study? They only did it once in a while. I remember the one that was called the balloon, and it was up in the sky, but it was white. It was a white balloon in a white sky, and we were supposed to find the balloon. But anyway, back to our picture study. It's here. It's a beautiful art gallery, but it's also a beautiful revelation and devotion that we have with the Stations of the Cross. So, short class because it's Friday. No, really, I'm done. Yeah.